I'm a 17-year-old female who recently found out about this subreddit. I'm not new to Reddit or anything paranormal/cryptic. I mostly joined because I grew up watching ghost adventures and fact or fiction, paranormal files, all total bullshit, but it just goes to show I have always been aware and interested in this stuff. But after reading others' experiences, I figured I should share some of my own in hopes of getting any advice or answers as to what could be messing with me. I live in Florida and have always been aware of many Native American culture, even though I'm not of that heritage myself. I'm not sure if this is pertinent, but so I timelined and tried to write down everything I remembered about these experiences to give me a guide when writing this. It started from when I was very young, and the first instance of this happening was when I was living with my grandmother. Her and I were very close. This will play in later. I was wide awake in bed, unable to sleep, with her to my right. There's no doubt in my mind that she was deeply asleep only a few inches from me. Every television in the house was off, and the only other person in the house was my grandfather asleep in his room. Then very clearly and loudly I hear my grandma call me from the kitchen. Almost how you'd be called for dinner. I know it's common to hear your name being called mistakenly, but I did more research on this as a teen, and apparently when you hear your name being called this loud, you're supposed to reject it. I did not. Not knowing this, I just huddled closer to my grandmother and kept my eyes locked on the open door. The second instance was around 13 or 14 when my father took me on a family trip to Las Vegas. We visited some part of the Grand Canyon, and while my family was waiting in line for a skywalk bridge we had paid a tour for, I wandered around the edge a good distance away from my family and decided to yell my name into the canyon to hear my echo. When it came back to me, it sounded distorted and almost like grandmother had yelled my name back. It might have not been my grandmother exactly, but very similar. Nevertheless, just the fact it was distorted was enough to scare me a little. I don't put much weight into this experience because it might have just been my voice being thrown weird. This next one happened when I was 13 or 14 as well. It's the most terrifying one I've had, and every time I tell this story to people I start to cry or tear up. This is the closest I've ever been to whatever this is, and proves my point that it's mimicking people I care about. I was on a vacation with my family in Key West and had rented a home. I invited my best friend, who we will call Ash, to stay with us. On the third day we had decided to skip out on the boating trip and mooch off the house owner's Netflix all day. On about the 5th episode of what we were watching, we decided on a snack refill and bathroom break. We paused the television and I make my way to the kitchen. I believe that Ash had followed me into the kitchen and leaned on the island while I prepared some chips with my back turned to her. I held a full conversation with whatever that thing was and even looked back at her on her phone. I fully had no doubt in my mind that I was talking and looking at Ash on her phone. She even held it in this specific Ash does. I turned my back for a split second to pick up the bowls and suggest we head back to the couch when I see Ash, or the real Ash anyway, walk out of the bathroom, which was a solid 30 feet away. My body immediately went cold, and the first thing I asked her was how she got to the bathroom and in and out without me hearing. She then gave me the weirdest look and told me she's been in there the whole time since we got up. This is where I start freaking out and insisting that I had just been talking with her and even physically saw her. She joked about doppelgangers and how maybe she was gonna die. I quickly suggested we get out of the house and walk around the neighborhood. She then informed me she had gotten her period while she was in the bathroom the same time I was talking to whatever I was talking to. We walked around until my mom called me that she was back in the house. We are still best friends to this day and have been for 11 years, and I asked her about it today before I wrote this. She said she didn't hear me talking with anybody at all. Now at this point you guys must think I'm crazy, but for this next one I have a witness. I felt a little less crazy after it happened with people who freaked out as much as me. Again, I was on vacation near the Great Smoky Mountains, but just a little west in Sevierville, Tennessee. We had our previous reservations canceled, so we took this little run-down cabin owned by a local woman. Now, we got there late at night, and the moment we all stepped out of the car, the first thing we heard was a man's voice saying, "Hey neighbors," coming from a cabin to the left of ours that was higher up on the mountain we were on. We couldn't see the cabin, really just a road that led further up, so we assumed he could see us, but we couldn't see him. Probably some guy on his balcony. My friendly stepdad yelled a "hey," and we waved up towards the direction it came from. It wouldn't have been weird if this didn't happen every time we stepped out of the cabin or car. My family completely wrote it off as some type of hospitality we were not used to in Miami. Retelling it, my brother and my friends agreed it was weird. I did hear constant footsteps around the cabin at night and some outside my window. It was a raised cabin, probably a story or two off the ground, but I don't give it much thought since wildlife is a thing in the woods. Just something I thought I should mention maybe. The thing that really propelled me into researching what the fuck was happening to me was when I was having a photo shoot in the woods behind the cabin and both my sister and I heard something calling my name deeper into the woods. Since I was with my younger siblings, I went into full big sister protection mode and almost threw them back down the little slope we had to climb to get into the woods. We were all shitting bricks from how clear it was and how we all pinpointed it was coming from the deeper woods and nowhere near the cabin. This was during the day and we all were so thrown by this we stayed in for the rest of our trip. We all agreed it was a woman's voice and the first thing I asked my mom when we got inside was, "Did you call me?" She had been lounging in her room with my stepdad all day, trusting that I could take care of the younger ones just outside the cabin. She saw how freaked out the kids were and we didn't really go out at night for the rest of our trip. I think I reacted this badly to this one mostly because I had kids to take care of and I can tell they were terrified out there. Again, the voice sounded like somebody was looking for me or calling me back somewhere. With no knowledge of what this could be, I had finally decided to look into things when I turned 17. I had no previous knowledge of Wendigos or skinwalkers or anything cryptic, only shitty ghost investigations and Zach Baggins making something out of a scratchy EVP. I'm desperate for answers because at this point I'm constantly thinking about it and driving myself into rabbit holes of information and myths and legends. Arizona Desert Highway Skinwalker. I had an experience many years back that I want to finally put down on paper. It was in 2003 when I was moving from California to New York. I haven't mentioned this story to anyone except those closest to me, because my fear is that talking about it will bring it back to me. It's bad enough to keep haunting memories in hidden caverns of my mind. I don't also want people to think that I lost my mind out in the Arizona desert on that starry night. I live in Denmark now, so that night in the American desert seems like a world and an era away. Nothing happened to me, in the sense of the body. While it was happening, it was terrifying and traumatizing. I have never been so scared, so alone in such a huge empty world, and in such imminent danger as that night. If you fear that talking about or reading about animal spirits can conjure them into your life, I recommend that you stop reading here. Here's my story. I had taken a job offer in New York City and quit my job in San Francisco. So I had a month in between of free time. This was just a couple years after university, so I have friends that had moved back from our university town in Santa Cruz to various places around the country. With this free month, I could do what I wished, so packed my things, everything I owned, into my pickup truck, with a camper top, and headed out on a road trip to visit my college friends around the country while driving to New York. Honestly, I lost track of time in Los Angeles after many nights at various venues and events. I had been crashing at the apartment of my friend Kyle, actually crashing at the apartment of some girl that Kyle was crashing at. As there was always another event being promoted or reason to stay a few more days, I woke up on a Tuesday morning, wrote a goodbye note, and ventured out to find my pickup truck with all my stuff. It was a bit of a panic, because had it been stolen, the only physical possession I would still have in this world would be left to the knapsack on my shoulder. I found my truck, and pulled out heading for Las Vegas. The next city I wanted to visit a friend in was Atlanta, but I figured I'd do some solo adventuring and hit Las Vegas and the Grand Canyon while in this part of the country. When I came to the desert town of Barstow, which is a couple hours east of Los Angeles, I lost control of the truck for a second, grabbed the steering wheel and managed to pull over haphazardly but safely to the shoulder of the highway. This was lucky as the highway had a lot of big trucks. I got out to inspect, and my back left tire was flat. These details are not part of the experience in Arizona, but set the scene leading up to it. It was a feeling of the days of several days of socializing with wannabe celebrities in Los Angeles, followed by what felt like a very unsafe and shocking experience on the desert highway. I switched out the flat tire for the spare. Each time a big rig would be heading my way, I would literally run around my parked pickup truck to avoid it and try to stay safe. The flat tire being on the left side of my truck meant I had to jack the truck up and do the work with my body situated just by the most right lane of the highway. This is the lane that the big trucks like to drive in. All was fine, and I could drive a few miles until I found a tire repair shop. It was a small cheap shop somewhere in the desert, run by Spanish-speaking Mexicans. The shop was one of those cinder block and aluminum workshops with plenty of tires hanging along the wall with cheap prices painted on tires with white paint. It turns out that it was just the air intake valve that broke, likely from the desert heat. It literally cost only $4.50 to repair. That being all good, I realized that it was now close to sunset, so I changed my plans. I decided to forget Las Vegas and the Grand Canyon solo adventure, and hightail it out for my next destination city, all the way on the East Coast, Atlanta, Georgia. This would turn out to be the most terrifying night of my life. The flat tire was just the fear appetizer before the pure dread of hell would be unleashed. So, I pull out of the tire repair shop with determination to get to the East Coast as soon as I could and not stop unless necessary. I decided I am going to drive east as long as I can until I am too tired and will then get my rest in the truck. Early in the eve I was really enjoying the drive. With a crimson red and glittering gold sky behind me, the desert was beautiful in its vast empty serenity. As I had spent most of the past 2 years in an office environment, I was feeling exultation by the chance to be under such a gigantic and beautiful open sky above the flat sand of the desert. And the tall cactus were majestic and proud as they scrolled past my truck on each side. Sunset fell into darkness and the celestial show above the desert was another display of the natural world's unbelievable beauty. There was no moon. At one chance I pulled over just to look up. The road was pretty empty, it was not quite midnight, and aside for stars, I could see the Milky Way, and when you see it like that it really lives up to its name. Suddenly, I felt uncomfortable. I had a sense that this intoxicating beauty was somehow luring me into danger, and I was surprised to suddenly feel very alone. It was just little me and all my humble belongings packed under the camper top of an old yellow Toyota pickup truck. I drove on. My fascination with the natural beauty soon waned until the night desert was like a hypnotist of sand and cactus counting down from 10 and putting me in a trance. The road was all mine at this hour, and it was one of those moments where it felt like I could be the only person alive on the planet. And then I saw something in my rear view mirror to remind me that I'm not alone. It wasn't a car though. It was a man. He was running, but as I was driving faster I thought that I must have just driven past him and just see him now. I drove on. But I was no longer sleepy. I was wide awake and my mind was racing to rationalize what it was I had just seen. I didn't get a good view, but I had seen a man. It just didn't add up, something was off. I couldn't think of a scenario where a man would be running along a freeway late in the night way out, in a desert. I relaxed for some moments, I must just be seeing things. Some of those cactus could make you think you saw anything. I drove on. With an elevated level of alertness. Now I didn't want to stop. There might be something out there. And you know I'm going to see him again. I knew that night that I would see him again. I drove on. On that straight road leading east, I saw him again in my rear view mirror. This time, he was not fading away, but holding speed about 10 or 12 car lengths back. I could barely see him. I checked my speed. I was doing about 60 miles per hour. Impossible, I thought. I let my speed slag off a bit and indeed the man got closer. I could see him good now about 2 to 3 car lengths behind me and illuminated slightly red from my backlights. He was naked and barefoot. And running like that. It was amazing and terrifying. What is this creature and what does it want with me? I decided I had had enough and floored it. My truck was pretty loaded, and doesn't accelerate good anyways. So as the speedometer moved ever so slowly up, my focus stayed on the man running behind my truck. He picked up speed and ran around so that he was running in the oncoming lane to my left from the driver's side. I could see him real good now through the driver's side window. His hair was dark and pushed back about neck length and his skin dark, and his face black with angled white stripes like he had some kind of war paint on it. I checked the speedometer and was hitting almost 90. I drove on. And he ran with me. I did not understand how this man, could run this fast, and barefoot. He then accelerated faster than I was driving at, and I watched him run off ahead at an insane speed. I couldn't believe the speed of those legs moving as he sprinted down the straight flat road. I drove on. With my heart pounding, adrenaline pumping and sheer waves of dread pulsing through my body. I thought to turn around and go the opposite way, but realized what the use if he can run that fast. It doesn't matter. I drove on. I hadn't seen a car or any humans, at least who can outrun a car, for over an hour. And then the truck bumped. There were stones on the highway. They were small stones, but I taped on the brakes. Then I floored the brakes because the man was standing in middle of the street with his arms up and out a bit like he is putting on a challenging display. He pointed both his index fingers at me with parallel arms, and then while holding his gaze, he wiped his neck with his finger horizontally from left to right, miming a throat cut by a knife. I understood this sign language. The man walked up to outside by the driver's side door and tapped on my window several times. I was afraid he would break the window. He was talking in some language, like a Native American language that made no sense to me. I could see his face very clearly. He did have some kind of black paint on his face with 3 white stripes under each eye and white oval on his forehead. He continued his rant, blustering with a firm gaze. I was relieved to see 2 headlights in the rearview mirror. A rig was approaching. The man looked in the direction from we had come. He looked back at me and I saw his eyes. They were dark. At that instant, the man ran off away from the road and into the deep desert. The truck veered into the oncoming lane to pass, and my truck shook and waned from the vacuum and force of air as the rig passed with its blaring horn giving a deafening Doppler effect. And it passed. And in sudden silence, I watched the dust fall back to the road as the rig slowly vanished into the darkness ahead. I drove on. The sun rose, and only stopping to get gas in New Mexico, I did not dare to take my sleep break until I was in Texas Wednesday night. I will not be doing any driving in the deserts of the American Southwest. I feel as thought there is a spirit there that knows who I am. We have unfinished business and I prefer not to see it again. Skinwalkers. As legend goes, to become a skinwalker you must attain priesthood, and then kill a member of your own family. Then and only then can you gain the powers to shapeshift. Then, and only then, are you a true skinwalker. According to local folklore, a man had done just that. An Indian priest had supposedly not only killed 1, but 5 immediate members of his family. They never caught this man. He disappeared into the woods, never to be seen again. When Jason and Alex set out for their camping trip, they knew all the old legends. And they laughed at the idea that a skinwalker would come get them if they trespassed on the old Indian land. The same land that the supposed murders had taken place. And why should they believe the legends? A man becoming a beast was probably the most ridiculous imaginable. Jason and Alex were brothers. They spent their entire lives together until Jason had gotten married. Then Jason moved away, and started a family. But not Alex. Alex stayed in their hometown, tending to their parents, making an honest living off the land, and tried to be a good person. And Alex had succeeded at this. He hadn't broken a commandment in years, and was well on his way, well, in his own mind, to heaven. 3 years had passed between their last get-together. And 3 more might have passed if Alex didn't insist on a camping trip. But insist he did, and there they were. It was getting dark, and the 2 of them were laying out under the stars. They were deep in the woods, and they had no GPS or maps, but they knew the path back from where they were. They had gone there as kids. Never know. Huh? Alex replied, he only caught bits and pieces sometimes. We can never let Dad know, Jason reiterated. Know what? That we stayed on the old Indian land past dark. We promised him as kids, and I wouldn't want to upset him now. He's getting pretty close to dead, and if we started an argument now we may not resolve it in time for, you know. Just don't tell him or Ma. Okay? Okay. No problem. They both were silent for a while, until up creeped a small raccoon. Well, look at that, Alex called, as he pointed towards the critter. It stared at them for several minutes. Not moving, not attempting to flee when they motioned towards it. It stayed almost perfectly still. And then finally it left. Minutes later came a deer. Again the creature stayed and watched them. Unwavering determination glared in its eyes. For about 2 hours the duo was kept awake as every animal they knew to live in the forest, and some they were almost sure didn't inhabit the area, came to gaze upon them. The final animal was a gray wolf. It slowly moved towards them, and when it was 5 feet away it stopped. "Don't move. Don't panic. It'll go," Jason assured Alex. The wolf slowly stood up onto its hind legs and then its limbs began to contort and pop. Horror slid over Jason and Alex's faces as they saw the fur tear open, revealing light brown flesh underneath. Finally, they gazed upon what looked like a man with a wolf head. The skull of the wolf split open like a melon. The fur sliding off it, the bone chipping and falling like a fragile eggshell. And in its place slowly grew out the head of a man. The man now stood before the paralyzed brothers. They couldn't seem to move. "This is my land," said the man, with an almost supernatural smile. Now, mister, I'm gonna have to ask you too," though Alex trailed off. "Get the fuck away from us," Jason said as fiercely as he could. The man began to laugh. And as he continued to laugh the pitch changed. It grew deeper, from that of a man to that of a demon. And soon it sounded as if Satan himself was bellowing out at them. The man's skin grew black as coal, and his eyes yellow like a cat's. His demonic laughter echoed through the forest, as he drew closer and closer. The brothers being unarmed, they had no choice other than to flee. And that's what they did. They ran as fast as they could, except instead of out to their cars, they were cornered into running deeper into the woods. For hours they seemed to play cat and mouse. Several times animals they passed would burst open in a grotesque manner, revealing the deranged man. But they continued to run. Finally reaching a cabin, they ducked inside. They were filled with fear, and the brothers felt that leaving the cabin would end in their deaths. What they found in the cabin made them regret their ignorance on legends. For in the main bedroom of the cabin was corpses. At least 100 of them. Every animal they had seen that night was there, along with some larger bodies. Some human bodies. It was then that the man burst into the room. Except he was once more a wolf. In his deep voice he snickered out, "Welcome home." The following week the authorities found the cabin during their search for Jason and Alex. Both brothers' faces looked as if they were eaten by an animal of some sort. 6 days later a security camera several states over caught Alex filling up a car with gas. Several eyewitnesses also reported seeing the dead man. And on nearly all accounts he was seen smiling a wide, toothy, unnatural grin.